The year is 64 CE. Imagine you are standing in the narrow, winding streets of Rome. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and rotting garbage, but cutting through it all is the scent of fear. A woman is being dragged past you, completely naked, her skin smeared with excrement and blood. She isn't a criminal mastermind. She might just be someone who rejected a powerful man. The crowd around you isn't looking away in horror, they are cheering. This isn't a riot, it's a parade. And for the woman in irons, this public humiliation is just the appetizer for a main course of suffering that is so depraved, history books have tried to scrub it from existence. We grow up hearing about the glory of Rome, the marble statues, the philosophy, the laws. But beneath that veneer of civilization lay a state-sponsored machine of sexual terrorism designed specifically for women. The Romans didn't just want to kill their enemies. They wanted to dismantle their souls. They turned execution into a pornographic theater where the audience didn't just watch, they participated. The cheers you hear are not for justice, but for the systematic destruction of a human being's dignity. But the street parade is nothing compared to what awaits her at the end of the road, because when she reaches the Colosseum, she won't be fighting for her life like a gladiator. She will be the star of a twisted play where the script calls for her to be violated by beasts before she is allowed to die. This wasn't random cruelty, it was a highly organized ritual known as damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. But for women, there was a sick twist. Before the animals were released, the victim was forced to reenact scenes from Greek mythology. The executioners would dress her as Pasiphae or Europa, characters from stories involving bestiality. But here, the bull wasn't a man in a costume, it was a real 1,000-pound animal, trained to sexually assault the woman in the center of the arena. Tens of thousands of Roman citizens, men, women, and children, watched this spectacle while eating their lunch. They cheered as the animal attacked, treating a woman's rape and disembowelment as afternoon entertainment. The psychological terror was absolute. The victim wasn't just dying. She was being reduced to meat, stripped of her humanity in front of the entire city. It was the ultimate message of power. We own your body, your shame, and your death. And if you think the crowd was just a passive audience, think again. They were the directors of this nightmare. With a simple gesture, they could demand that the torture continue, ensuring the victim stayed conscious for every second of her agony. The mob would hurl rotten vegetables and stones at the women as they were paraded through the streets before the main event. Roman poet Martial described how guards would deliberately stop the procession in front of the victim's own home or the temples where she used to pray. They wanted to erase her from her own life before ending it. If she tried to cover herself, guards would break her fingers. If she collapsed, they dragged her by her hair. Families were encouraged to bring their children to these events. It was considered educational, a lesson in what happens when you defy the empire. Sometimes a woman's own family members would join in the stone throwing to prove their loyalty to Rome. Terrified that showing mercy would land them in the arena next to her, the social pressure was a weapon as deadly as the sword. But there was one group of women who were supposed to be untouchable, whose purity was the very foundation of Rome. And when they fell, the empire created a punishment so terrifying it makes the arena look like a mercy. The Vestal Virgins were the holy priestesses of Rome, guardians of the eternal flame. They were revered, powerful, and sacred. But if a Vestal was accused of breaking her vow of chastity, she faced a fate worse than death. Rome couldn't spill her blood without angering the gods, so they found a loophole. They would bury her alive. The accused priestess was stripped of her robes and beaten into silence. Then she was led to a small underground chamber known as the Evil Field. Inside, there was a bed, a lamp, and a small amount of bread and water, just enough to keep her alive for a few days of pure psychological torture. She was forced down a ladder, and then the entrance was sealed with earth, erasing her from the world while her heart was still beating. Trapped in total darkness, suffocating slowly as the air ran out, she would die alone in a stone box. But the true horror wasn't the isolation, it was the sound. The chambers were designed so that the screams of the dying woman could be heard from the street above. Romans would gather above the buried tomb to listen. For days, they could hear the muffled cries and scratching of the priestess trying to claw her way out. Emperor Domitian, a man with a taste for cruelty, personally oversaw the construction of these chambers to ensure the acoustics were perfect. He wanted the city to hear the sound of divine justice being carried out. It is recorded that one Vestal survived for 18 days in the dark, 18 days of madness, hunger, and terror. And when they finally opened the tomb and found her still alive, they didn't save her. They declared her survival an insult to the gods and executed her on the spot. It was a rigged game where survival just meant a second, more violent death. But the emperors weren't just distant observers. Some, like Caligula and Nero, were hands-on participants who turned torture into a personal hobby. Caligula didn't just attend executions, he choreographed them. He built a private arena beneath his palace where he could experiment with new torture techniques on enslaved women, refining the art before debuting it to the public. He invited foreign ambassadors to watch, using the brutalization of women as a form of diplomatic terrorism to show the world what Rome did to its enemies. Nero took it a step further. He would dress up in animal skins and personally attack men and women bound to stakes in his garden, acting out his beastly fantasies while his courtiers applauded. This wasn't madness, it was policy. It was the total, unrestrained expression of absolute power, where the emperor's pleasure was the only law that mattered. These men weren't outliers. They were the products of a system that viewed compassion as weakness. And while the Colosseum is now a ruin, the psychological mechanism behind these horrors is still very much alive. The Romans believed they were the pinnacle of civilization, even as they cheered for rape and torture. They normalized brutality by wrapping it in the flag of justice and tradition. Today, we look back at them as monsters, but we must ask ourselves, what forms of public shaming and destruction do we consume as entertainment? We may not have lions and arenas, but we have digital mobs that can strip a person of their dignity and livelihood in seconds. The technology has changed, but the human impulse to gather and watch someone be destroyed remains the same. History is a mirror, and the reflection isn't always pretty. If this deep dive into the darkest corners of Rome shocked you, don't look away. Hit that like button and subscribe. We have more secrets to uncover, more truths to expose. Until next time, remember, civilization is a thin layer of ice, and the monsters are swimming just beneath the surface.